Hello, I'm your host Dorothy Mashburn, and welcome to Salary Negotiations Made Simple. Here I show you how negotiating does not have to be overwhelming. I break the entire process of negotiating into easy-to-learn steps that you can use in any salary negotiation situation. Whether you're starting a new job or preparing to ask for a raise, expect to receive practical, actionable strategies that are based on real-life experiences. I'll be sharing tips that have been proven to work, where professionals like you have netted anywhere from $10,000 to $75,000 more in compensation. It's payment for the skills you already bring, so you need to know how to ask for payment for that value. Are you ready to learn how to boost your earnings? Let's dive in. I have the pleasure of hosting Michelle Rios in our studio today. Michelle is a sought-after speaker, soon-to-be author, and the highly acclaimed host of one of the fastest-growing global podcasts, the Live Your Extraordinary Life podcast. Michelle's relentless pursuit of her own extraordinary life helped her overcome the adversity, challenges, and financial struggle of her humble beginnings growing up as the eldest daughter of teenage parents in rural America, and propelled her become an extraordinary self-made success in corporate America and beyond. Today, Michelle is a rising leader in personal development. She's a respected business leader and soulful entrepreneur. Her story inspires audiences around the world. Hi, Michelle. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Dorothy. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
I love it. Love your energy. Love everything about your podcast, Live Your Extraordinary Life. I was wondering if you could do a quick introduction about you, your story for our audience here.
Sure, I'm happy to. So again, my name is Michelle Rios, and I grew up in New England in a small town, but made my way to Washington, D.C. after college. I've lived sort of around the world through my work experiences and study experiences in Europe and in other places. I've spent the last 25 plus years in a corporate capacity in communications and as an executive. And I just recently made a transition to do more personal development and speaking and, of course, the podcast, and using everything I've learned over this very long and thorough career to really go into this next chapter with a lot of excitement and vibrancy to help people live their best lives.
Absolutely. And you do an amazing job. I have to say, I have to put a plug in for that because I was so inspired when I listened to your podcast. So, rolling back a little bit, tell us about, you said you've been in the executive room and faced all kinds of challenges. Tell me about one aha moment you had when you first got there, and what did you do about it? There was probably you had some expectations, and then those didn't materialize or materialize in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so many aha moments, but I'll just say I started off very early on in my career outside of the corporate boardroom trying to figure out how to get in. And then spent the next couple of decades rising in my career until I really did arrive. And my last role was as an executive vice president in a very large, mid-sized PR firm, but with lots of brand clients. And I will say a couple of things. When I first entered this whole space, very young, I didn't recognize the power that I had or the voice I had. I had been raised, like I think a lot of my peer set in the Gen X community was, to sort of follow rules and to do what you're told. And so I sort of waited for the other leaders and executives to ask for something of me. I was always available and always willing to work hard and work late and do all of those things. But I didn't recognize the value I could bring by stepping forward and being proactive and saying, I've seen this. I think we need to do this. I didn't quite yet have a point of view. I was sort of absorbing everything. And I often say my career really started to take off when I stopped waiting for somebody to ask me to do something. And I started proactively just doing it and acting as if. So I didn't wait until I became the account director to start behaving like the account director. I just acted as if. And then it was sort of a fait accompli. They're like, she's an account director. We need to promote her. And I used that very keenly throughout my career. So when I knew it was time, I had been marinating in a role for a certain amount of time and I wanted to make the next leap and jump, I didn't wait and sit there with a list of pros and cons of I've done this year and I've done that and I've done this. I had all of that. I didn't wait though. I acted as if I had already gotten a promotion. What would that look like? What would that feel like? What would a vice president do differently than what I'm doing as an account director? How can I start acting as if I have that role and behaving as one? So I already, when it comes to fruition, it's sort of like a non sequitur. Nobody's asking questions like, well, of course. And that became a really winning formula for me in my career. Instead of waiting and going in once a year with a checklist of all my accomplishments, I stayed ahead of the game. I started to say, well, what are they doing differently than what I'm doing? How can I add more value? How can I start to see myself and feel myself in that role so that my confidence improves, so that my actions are more risk-taking? Because a lot of us are risk-averse, right? In mid-career, folks who are sort of like, we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to stand out of line, but we want to grow. And I think a lot of women were afraid to ask for what we want. So I challenge somebody who might be in that situation to not even before asking, to really visualize yourself in that next role and do what I say is feel, do, and have. What does it feel like to be in that role? Start acting as if. What does someone in that role do? And then watch the magic unfolds. It's not to say you shouldn't ask for it. You should ask for it. But there's something to be done on your part, because I talk a lot about this. My rise was steady over 2+ decades, but most meteoric, if you will, toward the end. Why? Because I had sort of figured a lot of this out and was able to apply it much more rapidly as I became more savvy and recognizing that my energy, how I present, how I show up, how I interact, is as important as my checklist of accomplishments, because people feel your energy before they see your accomplishments. And that is something a lot of people miss. A lot of people think, well, they'll just see on paper, it's obvious I should get a promotion. It's obvious I need a raise. That might be the case, but if your energy isn't there because for whatever reason, even though you say you want it, you don't know whether or not you can get it. And so you're acting as if it's not really possible and you're not sure it's going to happen. That energy becomes what you put out in the world. And then I cannot begin to explain to you how other people pick up on it, but it's just what people absorb. And then they're just kind of like, hey, she's not ready. She's not ready. You need to believe that you are there before somebody anoints you in being there.
Yep. So true. And this particular story resonates throughout the speakers I've had on this podcast. Whether you call it confidence, whether you call it energy, competence anymore is just table stakes. You have to have that energy to elevate you to the next level. You have to believe that you are there. So if there's something in your own psyche or belief system that says, I'm not sure, I need external validation of this, it'll be harder to get. Yeah. You need to internally believe that you have arrived before you are given the external validation.
The external validation is the cherry on the top of the, the sundae ice cream.
Right.
You really do need to feel it, believe it, own it, act as if, and then it comes much more easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You talk about a point of view. I'd love to explore that just a little bit more. What recommendation do you have for someone who is still unsure about their point of view in the boardroom, or maybe they're about to get into the boardroom?
Well, you have to decide who you are. So when thinking about a point of view on anything, the first and most important part of this whole equation is knowing yourself. And so while I could sit here and talk about the importance of X industry and knowing the ins and outs and the analytics, all of that sort of thing, I'm going to put aside, because there is a way of showing up that actually trumps all of those tips and tricks. Those tips and tricks work once you know these things. So part of it is understanding who you are authentically at the core of your being. A lot of us grow up and we come out saying, I want X and I want to become Y and I want to do Z. And yet we don't really know that that's what we want. It's sort of like what's been handed to us, right? I'll just use my example. I came out, I was the firstborn, I was the first to go off to college. And back in that time, it was very stereotypical. You become a doctor or you were a lawyer. And because I, quite frankly, was more squeamish on blood and argued well at the dinner table, it was assumed that I would become a lawyer. The reality is I spoke that language. I took the LSATs. I told everyone I was going to become a lawyer. I went through the motions. And yet I did not know that that's really what I wanted. And, the aha moment was, it's not really what I wanted. And so it took me reconciling the story I had been telling myself about what I wanted with who I really was before I could actually cultivate a point of view. Because if you don't know who you are, if you do not know who you are at your core of your being authentically, what you want, what you stand, it's very difficult to have a point of view. Because your reference point is always something outside of yourself. So I always say the most important thing you can do, regardless of how old you are, I do this with my 16-year-old. Get quiet. Get quiet. I don't care if you meditate or you go for a walk or you're listening to music, but there is in all of us that still small voice. And when you ask yourself critical questions about what you want, and you do not judge what comes up, because something will come up, and you don't judge it and suppress it and going, well, I shouldn't want that, but you just allow it to come to the surface and sit with it, you'll start to understand who you are better. And when you know who you are better, it's much easier to have know what your North Star is. What are you tethered to? What is your belief system? What are your values? And therefore, being able to authentically give a point of view on anything becomes a lot more easier done when you understand who you are. But most people, most of us, particularly, I think, to the point of mid-career, spend all of our time looking for validation outside of ourselves. We spend precious little time getting quiet. But if you look at all the successful leaders, doesn't matter who they are, but all the successful leaders of businesses, they have meditation practices, they have some sort of reading structure and discipline on getting quiet and listening to their gut or intuition or spirit. You can call it what you want, but that still small voice inside them as a reference point. And that should be where we all operate from. That's the heart of authenticity. That's understanding where your values are. That's frankly the key to knowing what your purpose is. And when you know those things, cultivating a point of view becomes a second nature to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the judgment comes very quickly though, right? Right away, once you find that small voice, it's easy to smother it. Like, I don't know how I'm going to support my family, or money is going to be an issue, et cetera, right? At mid-career especially.
Right. And I think it's counterculture. Like, well, that doesn't sound reasonable or practical or pragmatic. How can I do that? But, I challenge you to think about whether or not you are acting in the moment against that, or you see that as a stepping stone to knowing who you are and stepping into authenticity and breathing life into that desire step by step. It might not be a pulling off the Band-Aid. I will tell you, I did not take the fast elevator to where I am. I decided very conscientiously that I could have gone and become, I knew in my mid-20s that I would eventually end up in personal development, that was my passion, that I was a public speaker. I knew that. I was a writer. I wanted to spend my life in some capacity working on these issues and inspiring people. But I made a conscientious decision that it was very important for me to live my life while still keeping that dream alive. So it took me another 26 years to get there, but every stepping stone was still a movement toward that. I ended up in a corporate career in communications, where I had to write, where I had to speak, where I had to pitch my ideas, where I was inspiring teams, where I became the CEO whisperer, where I worked on a lot of the personal development concepts, if you will, not only for myself, but with others. And so, again, going back to that concept of whatever you want you to. So look for ways to cultivate the believe it, live it, feel it, do it, then become it. I spent 2 decades getting really good and honing my craft to come out at this point in time with a really strong foundation and confidence to take on entrepreneurism and personal development and speaking in a way that I have stories. I have stories to tell. I spent 2.5 decades building a corporate career, having a family, being in a marriage, the ups and downs of living my life before going out of the gate, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great segue to, let's talk about the mid-career professional woman who is already in a C-suite, sort of like what you were before. More and more I talk to people, there's some inertia that's holding people back from, living that extraordinary life or getting the tools. So I teach negotiations, but there's inertia. And I'm wondering if it is fear, is it something else? What is your opinion, and what have you found that works for getting people into action to whatever their end goal is?
I can speak from my own experience that we all have limiting beliefs, right? And there is fear in all of us about probably every stage. And I think to say that fear is eradicated or you banish fear is sort of a misunderstanding of how we live with it. I think the better way to think about it is to acknowledge that we have fears or we have limiting beliefs, and to allow that feeling, whatever it is, of inadequacy, of not enough, too average, not really ready, whatever the things are, to feel them, acknowledge that that's how you feel, and then still start to take action despite the fear. Because often the fear, and I've had people on the podcast talk about this as well from a therapist or a psychology standpoint, fear is often the thing that's happening before we take the action. It's in the unknown. It's what we anticipate. But as soon as you start to take action, a lot of the fear starts to melt away as you take one step and another step and another step. A lot of what we call, our anticipation of what's going to happen if we go and do this is not usually what comes to bear, right? It is what's happening in our minds. And that's the state we get into, this place where we get stuck in our heads, that we have inertia. We become like deer in the headlights. We don't dare to take any action. And the only way out of the rubric is to take some form of action, messy as it may seem. As the worst things that I've ever done in my career is try to wait until all my ducks were in a row and everything looked perfect, because your ducks are never 100% in a row. And once you get 5 of them in, the 6th one gets out of line and you're constantly rearranging the ducks in a row. And
right.
It's much better to take that imperfect, messy action in the direction of what you want to do, whether it's claiming a promotion or asking for a raise or changing departments or jumping to a new job. It's much better to just go through it and live through what the anticipation of whatever the big fear was. What if you get rejected? What if?
Yeah.
No one will die. What if they say no? What if? So what? Ask why. Then you have some concrete evidence or feedback to act against.
Yeah.
But until you are willing to put your foot in the water, your whole leg in the water, and move something forward, you will never know. You stay in this no man's land of stuck in your head. It's the worst place to be. Because all of these unimaginable, terrible things can happen there. And in reality, nobody's thinking about you. Man, that's the other thing. We are so consumed of like, what do they think of me? Nobody's thinking about you. That is the newsflash, right? We are consumed with our own place in the world and what we're doing. People are usually just trying to get stuff done. So when you stop obsessing about that and take action, as messy or imperfect, even if it's a no, even if it's a closed door, even if it's a rejection, I will tell you that's really good information. Then you can plan your next move. You will not die from a rejection. No small children will die. You will not lose your salary. Nobody's going to think differently of you for trying, right? And we waste so much time worrying about the what ifs.
It's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So a lot of the advice or self-help guides out there is prepare for the future, right? So have a LinkedIn presence, have your networking, but we don't even go do that in the fear that something crazy is going to happen. And then when we do get laid off or when we do have a setback, now we're not ready or we're not prepared for what do we do to pick ourselves back up again.
And look, I'm a firm believer of do what you can to prepare. That's always important. But at the same time, I will say there is anxiety comes from spending too much time focused on the future, right?
Yes. Yes.
Frustration and resentment comes from spending way too much time about what already happened and it's already done. There's nothing you can do about it. And we don't spend enough time just being who we are in this present moment. And again, it may sound so simple, but it is a very complicated concept for people to embody, this idea of your energy in this present moment is the most important thing that you can focus on. How are you showing up now? What are you doing to take care of that now? And as counterintuitive as this may seem, what are you doing to take care of yourself? Because the better you feel, the more joy you lean into in your life, even in your career, as busy and difficult and all the things on your to-do list as you may have, the better that energy and that magnetism that you are able to draw people, things, and experiences to you is. The problem is we get very tunnel vision. I have this on my to-do list. I'm so busy. I can't really worry about how I'm showing up. I just need to get things done. And you are unaware that whether or not you are aware of it, you are giving off energy that is not necessarily the way you want to be perceived or show up, but people are going to feel it regardless of whether you're conscientious of it. And so it is vastly important. Probably one of the most important things you can do is think about how are you showing up now? And yes, prepare, but I would even argue, even if you weren't prepared, it's not the end of the world. You can recalibrate. Maybe you'll have a week or two of being quote unquote behind the eight ball and you've got to go work on that LinkedIn profile and make a few contacts and write a few emails. Do it. Like it is not the end of the world. It will be okay. And I think we catastrophize what will happen if we don't have all of this or don't have all of that when we really miss the whole point of this moment that we're all in. The meeting you're going to right now, the conversation that you're having right now, that work product that you're working on right now, before you just jump into it, check yourself. How are you feeling? Are you anxious? Go do something to let go of that anxiety and show up calm and serene and confident. That shifts your balance of power in any conversation, any meeting. It changes your ability to think, your ability to make decisions. Your executive function is your most important asset at this point of your career. And if it is being hijacked because you're anxious, you're exhausted, your cortisol levels are off the charts, then you're not acting as an executive. And in which case you are going to have very precious little bargaining power.
Very well said. You talk a lot about in your podcast about the stories we tell ourselves from the past or the stories that help build our new stories. So could you tell us a little bit about that? And in your own example, like what were you telling yourself and how did you change to your new story?
Oh, that's a good question, Dorothy. Like stories. So I will say the power of your personal story is something everyone needs to be cognizant of, because it is that story that you tell yourself that becomes your reality. Because we tell that self, whether we're conscientiously reviewing it in our head or thinking about who we are, or telling people who we are, we're affirming how we show up in the world and what's going to happen. So let me give you an example. I grew up in very rural Maine. I had teenage parents. They did not go to college. My mother was a sophomore in high school when she had me. She got a GED with a toddler in tow. That was me. I had two siblings behind me. And then I was made vastly aware at a very, very young age that it was my job as the eldest to do really well in school, set the example, set the pace, pave the way, get into a good college, figure out how to pay for it. My parents would support us the best they could. I wouldn't say we were poor, but we were working class, financially struggling, right? Trying to make ends meet often was difficult. And so while we had a roof over our heads, there was a lot of uncertainty about how things, it was always the like what bills will get paid and which ones get put off, right? I think a lot of people can relate growing up in the States. There was a lot of that, right? It's not necessarily abject poverty, but it's working class struggle. And that's how I grew up. But my parents, despite being super young, had the savvy to say to me, you can do anything. Education is your ticket out. A lot of pressure on me at a very, very young age. So that had to be a story I had to grapple with later. But I was empowered by that story. I wasn't told, statistically speaking, you're not going to amount to much. I was told, you have an opportunity through education to change the trajectory of your life, the life of your siblings, and the life of this family. Mission impossible with yours to choose or accept, right? And I was all in. I was like, well, it's my responsibility. I'm the eldest. This is the birthright place. And I took it as both a responsibility and an honor and a privilege to bust my butt to pave the way. And I'm very proud of what I accomplished because of that story. I wouldn't be where I am today without that story, despite the pressure, despite the difficulties, despite many, many years growing up where I didn't have the most fun childhood because I was studying. I was taking an extra AP class. I was trying to figure out how to get a scholarship. I sacrificed a lot of the carefree days of childhood to do that. But that story served an incredibly important purpose in my life of opening doors to the next level. So for that, I am very grateful. But there came a time where that story, I had outgrown it. I was living in DC. I was in my mid-20s. I had gotten a full scholarship for graduate school. I was working full-time as an associate director of communications. I was going out. I was living the life. I was sort of in the prime of my 20s, dating and doing all the things, burning the candle at both ends. And my story was, I can outperform everyone by working hard. what I didn't anticipate, because it hadn't happened yet, I was on the brink of all of this happening before, but it hadn't unfolded until this moment in time. I got sick. I was burned out. I was exhausted. And I got Epstein-Barr, and, in a feverish delusion, I found myself staring at a 10th floor window of my apartment going, I'm so overwhelmed and exhausted. I'd rather jump than go through my day. And that was a huge wake-up call to me of like, I obviously had a great zest for life. I wasn't planning on jumping out a window, but I found myself in this position of being so overwhelmed and overburdened by the story of I must outwork everybody, that it wasn't serving me. And so that was a wake-up call for me. I needed a new story. And the interesting, I talk a lot about this in the podcast, so I'll leave it there for people to go find out about what happened, because that was a really big shift in my life at that point. I had to have a new story. And part of it was asking myself a question nobody had ever asked me, which was, what do you want? What do you really want? Not what is best for your family, not what can you do for your siblings, not how can you pay for college, not what can you do to pave the way for others, but what do you want? And who do you want to be? And that was a major changing point. My story then shifted again. And my story has shifted and evolved many times since then. And this is something that's critically important. We stick to old stories that keep us stuck often. We are our father's daughters. We are our mother's daughters. We are from a family and a bloodline of X. Well, everyone used to do it this way. Well, is it serving you now? Because if it isn't, here's the great news. You're the director of your own movie. You are the writer of your next chapter. You get to decide who you are and what happens next. Nobody else is playing that projector in your head. Your thoughts are the things that motivate your actions, and your actions are going to be what then propels what happens next in your life. It took me a while to recognize this, but I'm probably one of the fortunate ones that I started to recognize this in my mid-20s. Now, I didn't perfect or master this until well into my 40s. But when you start to recognize that you can shift the story, I could show up as someone else. And I'll tell you, you just came back from a fabulous trip overseas. Traveling became a lifeline for me. And I'll tell you why. What I found in going overseas was I could put my experience of my day-to-day life on hold, and I could open up the aperture of my mind, and there were limitless possibilities of what I saw, what I imagined, who I was, who I wanted to be. And traveling became a dream state for me. There is something very, for me at least, very thought-provoking and dream-provoking about the wonder and adventure of travel that opens up my mind in a way that I am not able to access that level in my day-to-day. And so now I make it a habit. It's part of a conscious choice and a value that my husband and our family, our son, participate and travel for this very reason. Yes, we like to see the sights, and yes, we like to see the people. The culture, all of this is part of it, but it is bigger. It is the recognition that you must leave your day-to-day life in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's meditation, it's getting away, it's stepping outside of your day-to-day to expand. And so part of my story evolution also came in to play with travel. When I would travel and recognize that that was a moment, might only be 2 weeks, but those 2 weeks afforded me a level of space and time and freedom to dream that would then empower me when I came back to the other side. And so I'll tell you, one of my stories right now is I was part of the hustle culture. I was about it's hustle and grind, I'll outwork you. I might not have the pedigree that you had growing up, but I will get it and I will outperform you. And that was my early life. And now I'm on the other side of that. I still work incredibly hard. I think it's important to have goals that you pursue, because it is in the pursuit of those things that we become who we are meant to be. However, the process is very different for me. I will tell you, alignment is an incredibly important word for me. Is it aligned with what I want, do, and how I want to show up? Does it support my extraordinary life? Does it? If it doesn't, it's not in. I had to step back from producing podcast episodes for a few weeks because I'm writing a book at the same time. And the old Michelle would have said, well, that's not possible. I need to produce all of them and have great show notes and put out these amazing videos. And I need to stay up all night. I need to do this. And I need to do the chapters. And I would have compromised my health and my well-being and my executive functioning out of the idea that I must be perfect and do all these things in order for it to be the right way. And what I recognize at this stage of my life, that the right way has to be aligned with my values and my authentic self. So in talking about living your extraordinary life, I have to give myself the freedom to be perfectly imperfect. And there are some months where there will not be 4 episodes. There might be some months where there are 6, but there might be some months where there are 2. And I have to live with that. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. That allows me to show up in a way that everything I do work on and I do produce is from a state of alignment and flow. And I might work 10 hours, but it feels like 2 because I'm in such a perfect state of flow.
Yeah. I think it goes back to your first point, right? About knowing yourself. Because if you know yourself, this is what you want to do. It's not, I have to produce 20 episodes in a month. It's providing quality content that is resonant of yourself that you want to achieve. So it doesn't matter if you produce 2 episodes or 10 episodes.
Well, and if my energy in producing one of those episodes is not in the right place while I'm producing it, I'll tell you that won't resonate.
Yeah.
People will, whether or not they're in the room when I'm recording it, that energy will be imprinted on that recording. And so when they listen to it, it will be absorbed that way. So I'm very conscientious of, how am I showing up during this recording? Am I in the right state of mind to do a recording? Am I well rested? Am I hydrated? Do I have clear thinking? Am I in a place where I can share authentically and openly and honestly and vulnerably? Okay, if I meet those criteria, hit record. Let's do this.
Right.
If not, we need to think about doing it at another time. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think to, kind of do a plug on negotiations, the reason I'm so fascinated or so passionate about negotiations is because of that. At the very core, it's all it is I want this, you want this, right? If you just boil it down. However, the way to get it is really to understand, is this the thing I'm asking for, or is money the thing that's motivating me, or is it fulfillment, it's joy? And it's really about digging deep and understanding, what it is that I'm fighting for here. And in the process, you also learn the other side, right? Like, what are they fighting for at its core, at their core? So I think it's more, and that's why I love having you here, because it's more than the dollars and cents, right? It's bigger than that, because you're finding yourself, and that's what sets us free eventually.
You just hit the nail on the head. How awful would it be to go into a negotiation where you're fighting for a raise, let's just say, for argument's sake, a $10,000 raise, when in reality, you don't really like the job.
Yeah. Yes.
And so for the $10,000 raise, you stay stuck in a job one more year that is not fulfilling you, where you might actually need the universe, if you're open to surrendering, what I always say, marry the process, detach from the outcome, putting out what you want, really asking yourself those critical questions when you go into a negotiation. What do I really want? Not I want to feel respected, so I must get the raise. But what is your end game? Do you like being in this organization? Is this place a stepping stone to get to something different? Do you want more responsibility so that you can move up quicker, so that you can go do this elsewhere? Do you love this place? And so you're willing to play the long game. Or do you need to make a complete side exit left because you're playing and you're fishing in the wrong pond and you're looking for validation and fulfillment and satisfaction when the reality is you're not taking care of yourself? And it seems like a counterintuitive question to pose, but I'm going to pose it because I think it's one of the most critical ones as executives, as leaders, as people in business. We never ask ourselves. But if you cannot take care of yourself, if you cannot love yourself, which no one wants to talk about love in business, but it's critical. If you cannot love yourself enough to say, you know what? I've been talking about needing a raise because I need validation, but the reality is my marriage is a mess. Or the reality is I'm not getting along with my kids, or I'm lonely. I don't have a good friends network. And I'm throwing myself into my work looking for validation or looking for something to be happy about. It might not even be the job. And you might be spending an enormous amount of energy going after something in a negotiation, and you're swimming in the wrong pond. You're fishing in the wrong pond. You need to be really honest with yourself. What do I really, really want? Because when you can answer that, you're going to go into those negotiations at peace, detached from the outcome, knowing who you are. And that is the most freedom you can ever have. And that energy of being at peace, being in this place of just like serenity is such a powerful place to be. I guarantee you that if you are aligned with that thing that you are negotiating for, truly aligned for it, it's yours. It's already yours.
Right. Right. I love that. Absolutely. That you hit the nail on the head there. That's exactly what it's all about, like finding what it is that you want. And I have a client who, wanted that raise, and we got her the raise, and turns out she really wanted the title. And so, and it's fine, no judgment here, but we've got to be honest with ourselves. So what it is that what gives us the meaning. And a lot of times we tell the stories that we've heard over and over again and say that's the thing we want, but we haven't done the work ahead of time to say, what is it that I want? Exactly back to your original point, knowing yourself.
So I'll just echo with my own example of, I have a really good relationship with the founder CEO of the company that I just left. And I met with him almost a year ago now to tell him that I was starting a podcast that was going to launch in January of this year, which it did. And that I was working on writing, and that the goal was to write a book, which I am. And that I was going to resign because I recognized that my role as an executive was all encompassing and would not allow me that time. I was terrified thinking about having that conversation. I was like, the founder CEO, like he's probably going to yell at me or be unhappy or grumpy or what have you. But I was so convinced that this was my path. So utterly convinced that needed to be what I did next, that when I walked into the room to meet with him, he immediately looked at me and he's like, there's just so much light about you. What is going on? And I told him, I was like, well, here's what's happening. And I'm going to go do this. And first thing he said to me was, I'm so incredibly proud of you. People will meet you where you're at. The next thing was, how can I convince you not to leave? But there was that space of, and it took me a while. I was lured into staying a little bit longer because I still needed the validation of like, well, can I do it all? Maybe I can. Who wants to leave a steady paycheck behind? I'm walking into the unknown. But a lot of people who will say to me, I cannot believe you left your job. Oh my God, like that's insane. I'm at a place in my life now where I said, I can't not try this now. I can always go back. Not that I would, but I always, if you've built up this experience, it's always going to be there. And I think we tell ourselves, I did for a long time, I wouldn't allow myself to take more maternity leave or anything because anybody who stays out becomes irrelevant. I don't want to be irrelevant. I want to grow. The reality is sometimes you need to leave to become even more relevant. I've left, but on such good terms, with such a great connection, with such support, and with so much love in a business relationship. I genuinely care about them. They genuinely care about me. That I know that as I launch into this next arena, I can't fail.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense, but like, I know that I'm so on purpose that I won't give up, so I cannot fail. I will rejigger things. I might have to do things differently. It might not be easy, but I know who I am and where I need to be. And so there is such alignment there.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are in that place of alignment, no matter what's going on, the universe sort of like arranges things. And we discount that because we think we must figure everything out before we take the leap. And I guarantee you, if you honestly ask yourself what you want, you know what that is, whatever that is, and you take the leap to ask for the promotion if that's what you really want, or to go and change industries, or try to start a side business, or whatever the thing is that you want, and you just take the messy action toward it, you don't have to have it all figured out. It'll be weird. It'll be like somebody called me out of nowhere, or this opportunity kind of fell in my lap sort of coincidentally. It's not coincidentally. It's because you are energetically aligned with the thing that you are on purpose to go do in this lifetime. And so everything will show up in its time for you if you marry the process and detach from the outcome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very powerful, because then you say, my success is inevitable, right? And once you say that, it truly is, because
it really is.
Yeah, you'll do the thing to get there.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So that's I love talking to you as always. A great way to possibly end this podcast, although we'd love to have you back. One quick question is, what is one thing that you would recommend our listeners do after they listen to the podcast? One thing, one tiny thing.
If you're not already in some sort of morning practice or morning routine, I highly recommend that you take a step toward it, whether that is, I just currently sleep until I have to be at my desk working, or go out in the car out the door. Get up a little bit earlier and either spend 10 minutes doing insight timer and sitting, even if it's uncomfortable and you're squirming for 10 minutes, just sitting there and being present and allowing for whatever comes up to come up, or write in a journal, morning pages, or go for a walk. Those are things that are going to add to your well-being well before you start your quote unquote work day, that are investments in you that will pay dividends down the road.
Yeah, love it. It's easy, right? 10 minutes out of a 24-hour day.
You can't afford not to do it, because the payoff over time is exponential.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for your wisdom, your insights, and everything you've learned from your experience. We love to hear it, and so we can learn from it and get better in the process. So thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing your story with us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And I look forward to coming back and having a part 2 conversation sometime in the future.
Absolutely.
There you have it, my friends. A great session. I hope you feel, like me, inspired to step into your authenticity and become what you were always meant to be, the most extraordinary version of yourself in life and in business. If you're ready to rise up and get paid for your worth, be sure to get the free salary negotiation training at dorothy.mashburn.com/fight for your worth. This is the ultimate step-by-step guide in order to help you secure a promotion or break the glass ceiling. Again, it's at dorothy.mashburn.com/fight for your worth. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.